Hey, what's up? This is Alex here. I go by Earl's World. This is a continuation of my video about sidechain. This is part 2. I highly recommend you watch the first part if you haven't already. In this video, we're going to discuss ways on how you can avoid using sidechain altogether, as well as sidechain pairs that work well together and some sidechain techniques. So I hope you enjoy the video and thanks for watching. So those are the 3 main ways that we can approach sidechaining, but I also want to cover how we can use composition and arrangement to create situations where we can avoid sidechaining. So the first way that we can avoid sidechaining is by putting notes in the spaces between the kicks as opposed to putting them on the kick themselves. And in this example, we don't have to do any sidechaining because there is no overlap between the signals. So keeping in mind, if you fill empty space, obviously there's a little less space because it's a 4 on the floor versus like a breakbeat pattern. But if you fill the empty space between the kick with the bass, then sometimes you can avoid sidechaining altogether. And so that's a great way and a great composition and arrangement tool to avoid having to actually put more sidechain on things. And then here's even a more nuanced example. So this is an example of doing too much, and I think it's something that you can avoid, where you want to have like a low tom going on, but you also want to have a kick going and you want to have a bass going, and then they're all just going to rub on each other and it's not going to sound as good because they're all competing for the same things. And keep in mind, I have the bass sidechain to the kick right now too. So what I would suggest in that case are a couple things. First, if you want to keep that rhythm, you like the rhythm, what you could do is potentially swap that low tom out for a higher element like a trap snare or just something else. And that way the frequencies will get out of the way of the kick and the bass and allow them to coexist a lot nicer. Or another way is that you can go in and you could potentially do some form of call and response where you have one of the low end elements going and then you stop and then you have the other one going. So very simple. I mean, this doesn't sound great, but I think it gets to the point. So I think the main point I'm trying to get is that we can avoid certain sidechain issues by just not sidechaining altogether and making better, more informed decisions about composition and arrangement, creating more space for our sounds to exist in, or changing the frequencies at which things exist to give each thing its own space to live inside of our mix. So to give a summary, if we have a source of audio that isn't changing a lot, I think volume automation is a great tool because you can get very granular with adjusting that curve and how you want it. But if you have a source of audio that's maybe more acoustic in nature or a little bit more dynamic, I definitely would recommend going more towards a compression based sidechain just so it can react to the source a little bit more. And then next, if you're looking for something a little bit more fine-tuned or granular, that's when I would start looking at the dynamic EQs and the spectral EQing, because that will really target very specific regions so you don't have to scoop out as much of the frequencies to get what you want. And lastly, the less sidechain we can do, the better. We can make better decisions at the beginning of our project so we don't have to be sidechaining as many things together. I mean, keep in mind, all the amazing songs from the past, they weren't using sidechain and they sound incredible because they had great song, great lyrics, great arrangement, great sound design, great instrumentation. So keep that in mind first. It's probably more important than all of these other sidechain tools that I'm showing you right now, but it's something to keep in mind in your projects. So I just wanted to go over a couple of important sidechain pairs. First of all, we have the kick to the bass. We just heard that in most of our examples. This is probably one of the most staple pairs in all of music. Another great example could be a lead sound or a vocal to the harmony. If we want to have our vocal or our lead sit a little bit better in the mix, what we can do is put a little bit of sidechain where we can scoop some of the frequencies out to make the vocal sit better. This also works great with vocals to background vocals as well. And then another example that I want to show you is effects to a main signal. So let's go back to that original singing we had going on right here. So I have this vocal sending to a delay return right now. So let's hear how that sounds. Still I fall. Yeah, I'm fall.
falling for you.
So we have this effect going, but as you can see, it's kind of stepping on the vocal itself. So what we can do is we can sidechain that effect to the main signal. And in this example, it's the vocal, and just see how much more space that it creates.
Still I fall. Yeah, I'm falling for you. And I don't know, if you feel the way I'm feeling for you.
So that delay then fills up all of the empty space without stepping on the actual main vocal. And I think you can apply this to a lot of your send and return effects, whether it's reverbs, delays, of things of that nature. So those are 4 really useful sidechain pairs that I love, but there are so many other pairs that I would highly suggest you look into. I mean, what are some that you guys like? Post them down in the comments below. So the first technique I want to show is that we can trace our kick. So for example, let's listen to it really quickly. If we want a super tight sidechain, what we can do is we could take a volume automator tool and then kind of draw the line of the kick to the point where we stop hearing the kick, like I did in this example, or you can barely hear it. Maybe a little going on at the end, but not much. And then if we took this shaper box and then applied it onto our synths or whatever we're trying to sidechain, it'll have a super tight curve to the kick, and so it'll blend together really well. There won't be space. You're not sidechaining too much away or too little away. This is a great tool to really get your bass and your kick to sit super well together. The next technique I want to show is that we can actually use specific bands to drive the sidechain. So in Pro Q4, what I have set up is a band, and when I select it and I put it in free mode, what I can do is I can shift what is triggering the band to move. And so in this instance, I am just having the core of the kick go, and every time it hits, it is making the hi-hat pop up a little higher than the high end. So listen to this. So this could be a great tool when you have a source of audio, maybe like a full drum loop, and you want to trigger just from the kick, that if you put it on the kick down low, you can trigger the sidechain for everything else while still keeping that thing in its main drum loop. So this is a very cool surgical tool. I know if you don't have Pro Q4, you're like, what about me? But I'm here to say, don't worry, you could do something similar. Maybe not quite as in-depth, but in the same vein. So what you can do is you can take an envelope follower and then map that to an EQ, to a specific point of the EQ that you like. And so let's look at this. So every time it's going, we can trigger a band. So essentially you can create your own dynamic EQ in Ableton. And then you can take it one step further if you want. If you can split the band, turn off the volume, and then you can filter what you're sending before it gets to the envelope follower. So if you only wanted it to trigger on a certain portion of the frequency for that band, you could do that too. So essentially doing what we did in the first example, but the Ableton version of it. So now maybe I want to clean that up a little bit. And we need to make sure we're selected from the right source, which is after the frequency cut that we're doing here. We might have cut a little too much. So there we go. And so now we're getting that trigger off a specific portion of the frequency, and we can make adjustments as well. So I think that's a very useful tool. So in a similar vein to what I just said, another useful tool is that we can sidechain filter our sources. And so this way we can be very selective over what we want to drive the sidechaining. This can be really helpful when you have kick drums that have a lot of low end going on, which will make the sidechain last longer, but you don't want that. And so you're kind of you could filter it out so it only is targeting from the click or the transient of the kick. And this way you can shape your kicks or your sidechain even further. And I think this is a great tool. So in Pro C3, you can do that. Like, you could adjust the threshold a little bit. And so this just gives you even more control over how exactly you want to sidechain. If you have a kick that's a little too thumpy, consider filtering out. And you can do this in Ableton as well. It's just a sidechain filter option, and it really can make your side chains a little bit punchier and a little bit quicker. And I think it's a great thing to consider and to mess around with and see how it affects the sound. The next technique that I want to recommend is where you put your side chains. So say we have 3 Pro Cs going on right now, but they're all using the same settings. This can be problematic at times because, one, if I want to change any of the settings, I'd have to go in and adjust it on all of them to make sure they match. And 2, I have more instances, which is going to eat up more of my processing, which is not great. So what I'd really recommend is that instead of doing it on individual levels, if you can group your things accordingly, like maybe having a sidechain group and a non-sidechain group, it would allow you to only use one sidechain or reduce the amount of sidechains in your project. And that's going to be very helpful from an organization standpoint and a processing speed standpoint. There are 2 more techniques that I would recommend. One, you could set up a ghost trigger triggered by like an operator or maybe just a click, and you can use that to drive your sidechain around. And this way you have a lot more control over what is getting processed by the signal as opposed to just the kick. So this way you can really sculpt and set what you want as the sidechain, and this can be very helpful. And then the second technique that I would recommend is you could potentially set up a sidechain bus. And to do this, you would need to download audio routes as a Max for Live device by Cycling 74. The reason I say that is some of the internal routing in Ableton is a little wonky. If you try to use the returns, for example, there's a couple nuances that if you ignore, you'll create some latency that you don't want. But Cycling 74 created this Max for Live plugin that kind of circumvents all that and goes straight to the standard routing, which is a very powerful tool. It kind of gives it a little bit more functionality like Pro Tools or, one of the other DAWs. And so you can funnel all of your things that you want to trigger the sidechain. So this could be helpful if you have, say, 2 or 3 different kick channels that you would want for different sections of the song and you wanted them in just one main sidechain bus. And you can control it from there. So get Cycling 74, and then this is called the sender. And what I can do is I can send the audio to the sidechain bus and then trigger the sidechain from there. And it can be a very powerful tool, I recommend. And the cool thing about this is you could, if you set it up once at the top of your template, you have a sidechain bus or your sidechain ghost trigger, you can do that once and be done with it and not have to worry about it as much anymore. It's a very helpful tool. So those are some of the techniques that I think you might find helpful with regards to sidechain, and I hope you like them. Hey, thanks for watching this video. I hope you enjoyed it. I'm going to leave a little cheat sheet in the description for you if you want to grab it. And if you have any helpful tips or tricks, be sure to leave it in the comments. Hope you all have a good one. Thanks for watching.